Alright, testing, testing. It's working? Okay. So now here's where it gets fun. Shed the layers real quick. I'll try to make this quick. I actually really like my hat. I'm gonna keep wearing it. Okay, so take this with a grain of salt because I'm not sure how much of this people are researching and how much is just being put out, but I see an influx of this targeted programming. So what this kind of thing is a reflection. It's done, first of all, we're going to talk about methods on a broad level. So broad methods would be social media and film, music. Alright. Social media, television and film, music. Though, I'm a music lover and stuff, but this stuff would be on a subliminal level. So let's go ahead and this is where the subliminal stuff happens. And I can make this text a little smaller. There's also direct methods. Hope this isn't too long. It's already 2 minutes in. I better hurry. Okay, so direct methods would be things like frequency-based technology. Wait here. So Pavlovian operating conditioning would also be under a subliminal method. A direct method would be classical conditioning, also Pavlovian. So I believe I've seen examples of this in real time. One example is I live in Monroe County. I used to live at a place called the Monroe. It was an apartment complex. So there was a guy named Robert Monroe who was known for his experiments in it was kind of the occult, but it was more like psychic abilities, the study of the mind, brain mapping, things like the gateway process. He's credited for being a part of that. That was later used by the CIA, the people who were involved in MK Ultra. So he's got some connections to brainwashing technology. I don't know about the guy's personal ideals, but I know that he has connections to those methodologies. So there was the Monroe in Monroe County, had an internet provider called Pavlov, and their logo was a dog. So if you know about Pavlov's dogs, it's a famous psychological example that's in most textbooks. I don't know if you'd be able to miss it or not. I mean, I can imagine someone feasibly missing that one. But basically, the idea is that you control people through different methods of conditioning. So you can control behavioral control through stimuli, response, and reward to such, and punishment or outcome control. So you can make someone do what you want them to do by controlling the outcome that happens when they don't do what you want to do. So it's known as negative reinforcement versus positive reinforcement. So these are both connected to Pavlov. So your social media feed can also feed into this stuff. They can show you something on your screen that makes you feel bad. And then if you give the response they want you to give and adopt the idea that's being subliminally presented to you, you'll see something that makes you happy. You might see something that makes you feel bad about yourself. And then you'll see something that makes you feel affirmed in your identity and your own character whenever you unknowingly, unwittingly change your behavior. Because a lot of this stuff is done in a way where the observer is not aware of what the punishment or the reward is for. They're just aware that they're getting more or less serotonin in their system, more or less dopamine. So it's like hit the vape. It lights up, and then I get the reward of serotonin and nicotine, which makes my body react in a positive way. So the same principle. You could put like crack in one of these and give it to someone, and because they've already been hitting their Juul or their vape or whatever, and they're fiending, they'll hit this expecting that reaction, and then they'll feel the same feeling of relief, and they'll do the same behavior. So it's a similar method. You could also punish someone by being like, you could punish them on their identity or their character by being like, oh, you aren't working this extra shift. We're going to now schedule you for shifts that you don't like or that are inconvenient for you. And then when your performance slacks, then we're going to punish you for that verbally through insult or through insinuation. So that's another method. Now, if you think like no one would do this stuff's actually normalized in our society. So there's the Bavarian model for the schooling system. That's a good example. Because Pavlov's conditioning, first it was done on dogs, then he tested it on children. Well, the Bavarians also, I think, was it them or the Romanians? They tested the same method in schools. That's why we have this grading, ranking system. That's why it's set up where instead of, teaching to understand and embracing, I guess, different thought styles, a lot of the schooling system is about punishing failure and labeling failure and showing you, hey, you're getting a B in this subject. That's because you didn't do this at this time and turn this in this way. And I'm not saying don't do your homework. I think I think if you do your homework, you're going to actually learn something about character. So there's positive uses of this kind of thing. I think people should be trying to be educated, but not blindly educated. Not receiving information and saying, because it's presented to me this way, or it looks this way, or seems this way, then this is absolute and concrete. Because we start to associate the world and the way we see the world with the way these stimuli are presented to us. Another good example is as vapes are basically operant conditioning, but also classical. You buy the vaporizer, you give them the money, you get the reward. That's pretty direct. That's more classical. A good example of operant conditioning is you post something that a group of people, because it doesn't occur naturally. There's Pavlovian conditioning can occur in not naturally, but in a social environment. Here's a better example. So yeah, let's say everybody's posting about the same thing, right? They're posting a picture of them with like a flag overlaid on their profile picture. They're like, this is because I support this cause. And then they get a bunch of positive engagement. They get a bunch of likes, a bunch of comments, they get a bunch of positives, right? They get positive attention is what it is. So they receive that, and then their existence, at least on the internet, is affirmed by these things. They do what the system wants them to do. They get their reward. The people who don't do it, let's say they get shadow banned. Their posts get throttled. Less people see it. Less people interact with it. So they feel like they're wrong if they don't change their profile picture to like the gay trans pride flag or the like I voted for this person or that person, or I stand with this cause or I stand against this cause, or etc. etc. The same thing happens with anything. It's usually not like the overlay thing. It's usually kind of just something I don't think most people actually give a shit about. I think some people do it and some people don't. I think a better indicator is when somebody has when someone disagrees with a group. So during the whole COVID crisis, there were scientists who were coming out talking about potential risks of a vaccine that was released before. And this is someone did the groundwork on this, so I didn't personally do this groundwork at all. But taking this on good faith, apparently they were finding people who had COVID passports who were dying also had white fibers in their nervous system throughout their blood vessels that were like expanding outward from their heart and from their lungs all throughout their body, and it would solidify when they were dead long enough. So they were finding these, like morticians were finding these and reporting it. It could have been propaganda, maybe it wasn't, but apparently some of these people who were reporting it were losing their medical licenses. Or people were saying, hey, there's something wrong with forcing people to get vaccinations. We can't be just forcing people to do it. We can't be saying you're better off dead if you don't get it because you're a murderer, because you hate old people and people with immune deficiencies. You can't necessarily, do that and expect no recourse. But they were kind of doing that. They were intimidating people verbally and with narratives. They're using subtle conditioning through the media and the news to make people get the COVID vaccine. And then whether or not you did or didn't get it puts you in a tribe, one or the other, the right or the wrong. And that's just one example. Imagine if everything boils down, all these free choices actually boil down to this tree. You got here, I can make a decision and end up this group or this group, and then you end up in another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one, until you end up, no matter what, funneled into some predetermined outcome, one or the other. So there's the rejects and the not rejects. It removes the gray area completely, and it just becomes a static way of being, is you either have to pick one or the other. It's kind of like negotiating with terrorists. They're like, we're going to kill the hostage if you don't give us the money. That's sort of what the government did for probably the last 8 years. And while that's all happening, they're showing us WWE on the TV. They're showing us propaganda. They're telling us this is happening, while other things are happening. And they were caught in this a few times. So I'm not going to get political here, and I'm not going to be like, you should have voted for this person or this person, because I think that entire dichotomy is false. I think it's built on a system of control and of compliance. And I think that there's nothing wrong with, obeying justified authority. But when authority misuses its power in that way and tries to, say, alienate groups of people based on how they voted after forcing them to vote between one or two things, and does compliance testing with things like COVID, like you have to get this medical treatment or else, because otherwise you're wrong or bad and we'll put you in a camp if you don't do it. That's when things get serious. So, and that's one form of targeted programming on the public. So that's what I mean when I say targeted programming, because I'm not going to try to unpack targeted individuals or the gang stalking stuff or any of that, because that is a very complicated conversation, and there's other people who have already done a better job of laying that out. But what I am going to say is that, say we have a control group with the right opinions, and then we have a control group with the wrong opinions, and this is all reflected through propaganda. It makes us see these two things in two lights. It splits everything into black or white. So you end up with, if my fucking thing will work, let me click where I want to click. Why is it not letting me click where I want to click? Okay. Okay, it won't select the tool I want. Damn it. That'd been so cool if it worked. Whatever, I'll just do it like this. Oh, it's forcing me to use the pen tool. Select. Holy shit. Okay. Black and white. The gray is completely turned into black and white. So there's this fucking A. Why can't this work right? So we have this gray area in here, right? That's the area where most people are, is they have, like, you know, they don't have absolutist opinions on absolutely everything. There's usually, you know, like, oh, I think this about this, I think that about that. So when you start funneling everyone into these categories, though, you start ending up, holy shit, it won't let me do it. You end up with this tree created by propaganda where it has to funnel you into one or the other. And then there's another black and white crossroads that funnels into another, and then another, and another, and another, and it just keeps going. So it's like, I'll try to do this a little better. No matter what, you end up sorted into group A or group B, because all the wrong answers land you in group B. So imagine if for each spoke on this tree, you got 1 point for every decision you made that put you in group A, and you lost 1 point for every decision that made you go into group B. So I pick all the group A answers. I'm like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. Pick all the group B answers, -5 points. That is the basis of how a social credit score would work. It's basically a positive or negative number that's determined by not just the decisions you make, but also things like the company you keep. Say you're around people who are in B, you lose points on that as well, because those are seen as being like nice to somebody who is in the bad group would make you also associated with them, judged by the same metric, and therefore you would end up put and sorted into the bad group. And so if you're like, oh, well, I'm going to do all these group A things, but I'm going to be unconditionally nice to everybody, you're going to start losing points, because some of those people you're nice to would have a low social credit score. And when it reaches below 0, let's say if we're going to act like it's like these small numbers, it would probably be more like below 100 or 1,000 or something, or some incomprehensible number, because there's so many billions of posts and so many billions of decisions. And this is all done invisibly, by the way. We don't actually see this happening. The systems automatically do this algorithmically. So you're then, say you prove to be resistant to these forms of conditioning, right? Then the ultimate form of conditioning is the oldest. It's social ostracization. If you are socially ostracized, then you are scared because you're going to be in the outside group, and we are wired to need a tribe, to need a people, to need some like social interaction. There's a fear of isolation. And that goes back to our caveman days. So that's basically how social credit score would work, and that would be another form of targeted programming. They can target you based on how high or low this number, this arbitrary number or variable is. Or there could be a list of variables. There could be multiple trees. You could be like really good on one tree but really bad on another tree, and then they're using these things to make micro adjustments and then eventually sort you into group A or group B or maybe group C. Maybe they are a little more advanced and they have group C, D, E, and F. Maybe they have like 7 or 8 groups. Who knows? But the principle remains the same. Negative reinforcement to prevent people from going against the system as it is. And by the system, I mean basically the mechanics that are working in place to keep things unfair. I'm not talking about like a government that's fair. Like when the government, because there's places where I think the government tries to be fair, and there's places where it's not. But we're going to use the example of like North Korea. In North Korea, say you don't show absolute allegiance to Kim Jong-un, you are seen as a terrorist traitor. You're put in the bad group. You're put in the fucking work camps. Say you are a very adamant follower of Kim Jong-un, and you do everything the regime wants you to do, your social credit score is going to be higher. You might have a higher status of living. And then when other people see people in group B, they're like, I don't want to be like the people in group B because those people are bad, and that's why things are bad for them. That's when we get into this idea of like a karmic credit score. You know how like there's the whole credit karma thing. It's like you do good on your credit thing, you get good credit karma, or how like a credit card works. Credit and debit, it's treating something like morality in the same way as you treat financial credit, like it's an interchangeable, exchangeable thing. When the reality is altruism has no merit at all unless it comes paired with the idea that you're not getting anything in return for doing the right thing. That's actually what a good deed kind of is. If I was like going to be nice to people all the time, and because of that they were just going to hand me $100, then everyone would be nice to everybody all the time because they'd be getting money. But then people would make a contest out of who's nicer, so they could get more money, and someone would probably find a way to game the system and then be a jerk anyway. So when you look at how groupthink works, how group psychology can be exploited, then you'll also notice that if we can't defend the people who are in our relative group B, the rights of the people we disagree with, for instance, say, it's like Trump versus Biden, and there's that whole thing. If the people who, let's say someone had a magic button where they're saying, well, I'm just going to make it where the people who voted for Trump have no rights, or the people who voted for Biden have no rights. Or they would just die instantly, like they had a death note or something. They would officially be taking out their own rights in the process. You have to allow people to disagree with you to also have your own opinion. Otherwise, your opinion is just a system of control. So you have to be willing to accept that, person A might think that apples are the best fruit. But if they say no one's allowed to think that oranges are the best fruit, then that person would be, at the very least, hypocritical in their ideology. And so when things become sorted in this way, where it's like we're going to change behavior, we're going to affect this rule, and then we're going to make it where this group gets punished, that's kind of how that works. It's switching the goalpost and changing it constantly. The goalpost is always moving. You always have to stay in compliance with it. And then it shifts you further and further away from being able to bridge that gap between Group A and Group B. So there's an experiment that was done where they had a ladder. And they had bananas at the top of the ladder, and then they had a monkey climb the ladder and try to get the bananas. Well, they didn't have it do it. Eventually one would climb the ladder. It's more of a thought experiment. There'd be a bunch of monkeys in this cage, and one would climb the ladder and try to get them. What would happen is they would hit the monkey with a hose and knock it off the ladder, and then it would, maybe try again, probably wouldn't. So that prevented the one monkey from climbing the ladder. Now let's say you want to prevent all of the monkeys from climbing the ladder. What they do is when a monkey climbs up and tries to get the banana, they would spray and hose down all of the monkeys, so that the ones in that group, when they see one going for the bananas, they'd drag them down and they would beat that monkey in order to prevent them all getting hosed. And so that's how, prison-style punishment works in some ways. That's how group punishment works. That's the kind of thing that they would do in, concentration camps. They would punish people for one person's transgression. You'd be like, this person tried to escape Auschwitz, so we're going to punish all of the people who are in the camp so that they will hate the person who tried to escape, so that no one else will want to be like that person, so that no one else will try to escape. They would do the same thing with slaves. Now, I'm not trying to say it's that drastic. Those are extreme examples. But what I am saying is that that's basically another type of conditioning. That's negative reinforcement conditioning. Positive reinforcement would be like, you're Nazi Germany, you give the Hitler salute, you're given honors or given financial stability, etc., etc. I'm not trying to say things are that drastic either. I think that, if I was going to go down that rabbit hole, then we'd end up in the Group A, Group B thing again. But what I am saying is, when it comes to a baseline level, this is how targeted programming works. And so that's what social media is doing. It hijacks people's opinions. I've noticed for years, you can't just be in the middle somewhere. You can't be well, I agree with this policy that this person said, but I disagree with this policy, because there's usually someone who will associate you based on that one opinion with one group or the other, and they'll have already received a bunch of propaganda that'll tell them this group's bad, this group's good, or vice versa, and it keeps that constant state of tribalism. So let's say you have two of these trees, and in one of those groups, Group B is the good group, and Group A is the bad group, and the other one it's A, then B. Then those two groups, they have their own ecosystems, but they always see each other as the other, so they won't collaborate, because they see the opposite side as, rather than, say, useful in different ways, instead as an enemy. So when your neighbors become your enemies, that's a problem. And when that's programmed into us through every means possible, then, and I'm not saying I'm immune to this, I've experienced this. I've observed this happen in myself before, quite a few times. It's the kind of thing that's done on a subliminal level, so it's difficult to actually catch it. You have to more see it in hindsight. But when it does happen, the next thing you know, you'll be like, wait, I've lost my actual agency. I've lost my actual opinion. I've lost my actual ability to navigate in the world because I went with this groupthink dichotomy. And now there's this whole other groupthink dichotomy, and I can't interact with those people at all for fear of being a part of their bad group, or being a part of this good group, or losing my status in this good group. So it creates this situation where being in the middle, being a moderator, being like kind of like a middle ground Switzerland, is the most discouraged thing, because then both of those group dichotomies despise you because you don't fit into either one. And so the way to combat this is simply to be willing to entertain multiple stances. It doesn't mean to hold two contradictory statements at once and be like, oh, the sky is blue and it's green right now, when it's not, when it's one or the other, but it's rather to be open to discourse and discussion in those things, which I think most people actually are reasonable about this and do this. But also to just be aware of propaganda and how it operates, and to be aware of the fact that our brains don't exactly have a built-in firewall for all of this shit. You have to kind of employ critical thinking on your own terms, and there are thousands of years of history where critical thinking was like discouraged by power dynamics, because survival is the baseline. You kind of have to learn other things. And as someone who's operated in survival mode for a very long time, I know what it can be like to feel like in fight and flight all the time. And so I think I can agree with someone on one statement and then disagree with them on another now. But there were times where it was like things would feel like life or death. And it's because people are psychologically hijacked by the very things we use to communicate with the rest of the world. Because we suddenly all have these magic mirrors now that tell us what to think and how to think, and can subtly program us through, rather than just, beaming thoughts into your head. I'm not saying that's impossible, but what I'm saying is it's not entirely necessary, because there are hard-rooted or hardwired flaws in the human condition. And so if somebody is wanting to try to make the world a better place, I think the place to start, personally, is trying to cultivate virtue and consistency, but also openness to a degree. Not to be so open that you let all of the propaganda in, but not to be so closed that you become hardwired to think in only one way. And so I don't want to be like, oh, I know this and you don't. That's not what I mean when I'm saying this, but I am saying that I think it's informative. I think it's something to say in a world where, when I scroll through all the social media shit, I'm not seeing much of anything at all. Anyway, I went over my Instagram limit, so I'm going to have to either cut this video into 2 videos, which I'm probably going to do tomorrow, or I'm just going to have to hopefully just post it on Facebook or something. But I feel like this deserves another thing, so there'll be more later. I'll talk about more of this later, because I tend to ramble, but I hope this was informative to someone. Yeah, I don't do this a lot.